Welcome into another episode of Zoom Action KSR's basketball breakdown show. I feel like I'm finally getting in my rhythm of doing my intros, Brandon, because I usually take like 6 takes for this one, but I'm doing great on my first take right now, so I'm just going to keep rolling with it. Zack Geoghegan here, Brandon Ramsey to my whatever side that is over there. We've got another great episode in store for you today. A lot of it is going to be kind of defense focused, though. I think we did. I think we've already done maybe a defense episode at some point already this season, but we've mostly stuck with offense. But defense has been a huge talking point for Kentucky. We've got some fouls to talk over, just some simple things that can easily be fixed and maybe help chop down that foul count that's really becoming an issue. I think Kentucky actually leads the SEC in fouls. Fouls handed out or fouls tagged per game or whatever it is, it's like 22 or something. It's a lot. But so we'll go ahead and start here. We've got just a handful of plays that Brandon has picked out from this Alabama game where Kentucky just kind of gets caught with their pants down and commits some lazy, dumb fouls. I think at least two of them, maybe all three of them, happen kind of early in this second half, where I think Kentucky was in the bonus with like 15 minutes left in the game. But I'll let Brandon run this. Go ahead and run this play here, and you'll just end up seeing some real, not even lazy defense, just poorly executed defense, I think. And you're going to see it here from Jackson Robinson. Just lets his guy really go right by him, get the edge on the baseline there, commits a really just bad foul that, again, really early in the shot clock here. Brandon, I'll let you kind of take over and dive into the next couple of plays here, but just what what is the importance of these type of fouls, especially early in the second half when Kentucky's really just struggling to stay out of foul trouble lately?
Well, I think the point with this clip and the next couple, Zach, is that this is how you watch that foul count grow. This is how you put a team into the bonus and the double bonus early on in the half. And we're going to keep Steven's microphone muted so he can't go on a rant about the officiating. But yes, is the officiating playing a role in some of this? Maybe so. Like out of the 10 fouls that Alabama or that Kentucky got in the first like 5 minutes of the second half, are one or two of them bad calls? Maybe so, but it's hard to complain about that when you're just handing them such easy fouls like this. I mean, this is number 15, Jaron Stevenson here in the corner. He is let me
Probably a
find it.
5% for 3-point
He
shooter.
is a 12 of 54 3-point shooter. He is 22.2%. So the best thing in the world, if you are Kentucky, is Jaron Stevenson catching the ball right here. You should be excited when this happens. And if you're Jackson Robinson, I would be standing right here and I would be literally be yelling at him, shoot it, shoot it, shoot it. Because you know he's going to miss it, and then you can rebound it. And that's like a great possession for Kentucky defensively. You get Jaron Stevenson to shoot a three. But for whatever reason, he closes out. He has bad footwork. Look at his hips, like way back over his feet. His feet are super far apart. He's given up the baseline to a guy that just wants to drive it at you. He does not want to shoot it. And then what happens when you're out of control? You're a little out of position. It's natural reaction. Well, I got to try to make up ground here, so I put my hands on him, and then it's a foul. That was only Kentucky's second foul of the half, but it's a nonsensical one. This isn't like, well, we stink at defense. This is just a concentration thing where you have to not have a little lapse in judgment and a little lapse in concentration and just be disciplined enough to close out short to a really bad shooter and then let him drive it into your chest and just be there, because then it'll just give it up. There's just no reason to put two hands on a driver like that if you have a better closeout.
Dipping under the 6 minute mark. I think they really start to stack up here around this spot. This play, you could almost chalk it up to Andrew Carr just kind of having half of a healthy back right now, but again, just not in a good position. To Carr's credit, Grant Nelson had been hitting. Like I think he was already at maybe 21 points at this point in the game. He'd hit a bunch of threes coming in as a 25% shooter. So you want to step out on a guy like this. But there's no reason that Grant Nelson should be able to get around Andrew Carr this easily to the point where Andrew Carr is literally stumbling over. I understand the back is an issue, but if these things are going to happen, you're just, again, easy foul calls that add up to your team foul total, get you in the bonus too quick, and that just really is what killed Kentucky down the stretch here.
Yeah, this was Andrew Carr's fourth foul, I believe, with 15:31 to go in the second half, and as I said, that's just mounting that foul count for no reason. Yes, Grant Nelson had made a couple, but come on, guys, he's still a 25% 3-point shooter. even after making a couple. Do you want to be there with a hand up? Yes, but that doesn't mean you have to close out to him in the same way that you would close out to Mark Sears, or you would close out to Youngblood, or you would close out to Aiden Holloway. Like, you can still close out short, but have hands up to kind of be ready to contest it. And then once again, you see, you know, like you can't move when your feet look like that. And when you also have a bad back, like, make it a little bit easier on yourself if you have a bad back. Close out short, stay between him and the basket, so you don't put yourself in a position where a guy that can is a very good driver. Grant Nelson is fluid with the ball for a 6'11" four-man, and now you have to put two hands on him again, just like Jackson Robinson, and you pick up another foul, and that's how teams end up shooting in the bonus for so long, like Alabama did, and they shot 34 free throws in this
Hmm.
game.
Yeah, and then our last foul here is just it's a kind of something that I think it was it Ugo maybe that had kind of an issue of
Mm-hmm.
really reaching over. That there was a one center over the last couple of years who really had a bad issue of just not going hands straight up.
Right here, where I have it frozen, like I have no issue with going to battle in this position. I have Amari Williams, a 6'10", 6'11", 7 foot, whatever he is, physical specimen, physical freak, guy that can jump, is strong. It was a 3-time defensive player of the year. Like, he should be able to challenge a player even as good as Grant Nelson. He should be able to challenge right here, but he has to challenge by going vertical. When you're inside of this restricted arc,
Hmm.
verticality is the name of the game. So anytime that you see as a referee, when he goes up, like right here, he has one arm down. And a lot of times that arm ends up extending into the offensive player. So right now, if you're this referee, there's probably one over here on the baseline looking. They see this right now. They're already thinking foul because he's not vertical. It's not two hands in the air, like kind of getting your shoulders into your ears and just jumping straight up. And as Coach Pope likes to say, using that championship chest. And then
Hmm.
now, as he comes back down, now you can see where he's not vertical. And like a lot of big men, they're gonna, he's gonna walk back to Coach Pope and he's gonna say, "I was straight up." It's like, I love you, Amari, but no, you weren't. Like, look at your arm here. That is going into Grant Nelson. It needs to be going straight up. And that
Hmm.
that little acute angle there, back to geography or geometry class,
Geography, wow.
yeah, that's no good. And that is a recurring issue for Amari Williams, is his lack of verticality inside. He's doing an okay job of blocking shots, but that's what I always talk about, the difference between blocking shots and protecting the rim. Amari Williams isn't a bad shot blocker, but he's not very good at protecting the rim. He needs to do a better job of getting guys to miss, or even deterring some other shots. But right here, Grant Nelson's going to challenge him at the rim, but he should be able to do a better job of not fouling and maybe getting him to miss a couple of these throughout the course of a game.
We can complain about officiating all we want, but these are three fouls within the first 6 minutes of the second half that are very easily avoidable. You avoid those, you're down from 17 fouls to 14 fouls, and you've got a little bit more wiggle room over the next 5 minutes to, maybe make some tougher fouls or fouls that it maybe would make more sense. Because sometimes fouling does make sense.
Yeah.
You don't want to have a guy just get a free easy layup or something like that. Make these guys earn their points. But especially on those first two where they're just non-shooting fouls, there's not much of an excuse for those to slide by without being like, man, you really would have been nice to have those back, especially for two guys that ended up dealing with foul trouble in that game. So let's talk about the 1-3-1 zone. So we've got five different clips here. I think it's all five zone possessions.
Yes.
Correct me if
Yep.
I'm wrong,
5 for
Brandon, but
5.
I think they were all 1-3-1. Was maybe one of
Yes.
them like a two? They were all 1-3-1.
Yep.
So
All 1
five
3 1.
straight 1-3-1 zone possessions. Brandon's got his first one here that we're just letting play through. So this was an awesome zone possession, honestly. Like, this is exactly what you're looking for. The defense was running around. You were making Alabama pass. You were making them work for their shots here. You had Mark Sears like throwing a one-legged, like one of the like a tough NBA pass wrapped around two guys just to get. I think it was or maybe it was Phylon that shot that, or no, Holloway that
It
shot
was
that
Holloway.
one.
Yep.
And Holloway's a good shooter, but you've got him about 2, 3 feet behind the line there. That's a shot you can live with, especially if well, hindsight's 2020 when the shot doesn't go in. You live with that because your team, the players were fighting very hard. They were playing their spaces properly. I thought Ainsley Almanor did a great job of just being active and not really being a huge ball watcher when he was in the zone. But Brandon, I'll let you take us through this play, and then we'll quickly, as quick as we can, go through all these zone possessions here. But just take me through what you saw here and how did Kentucky get away with a win on this possession, if you will.
Yeah, well, we'll start it from right here because this is really the first time that Alabama really gets any penetration and they start actually moving around it. But I want everybody to remember what happens right here on this little rotation as Sears threw it to Holloway and Lamont Butler kind of immediately followed the ball and took Holloway as Ansley Olmanar, what they call bumps, back down into the corner to take away Youngblood, who's a shooter. So pretty good, really good coverage and rotation right there between Butler and Olmanar. Olmanar does a really good job of bumping kind of in the passing lane, so you can't throw it down there to a shooter. Now you get a little bit of a dribble penetration here. Maybe not the greatest closeout by Otega Owe, but we're here. We're in the way. We're pretty well matched up here on the backside. In a perfect world, I would like Butler staying with a high percentage shooter, but at the end of the day, it's pretty late shot clock. That's another
Hmm.
positive of the zone is think about the number of possessions where Alabama had to take 24 seconds to get a look. It's not very many of them. So when you can make them use some clock, A, it kind of gives you a little bit of a rest. B, it shows that they're not getting what they want because it takes them longer to get to it. You get a guy who just happens to miss this one. Great job rebounding it on the backside by Otega Owe. So yeah, is Aiden Holloway getting an open 3-point look exactly what you want? No, but it took them 23, 24 seconds to get there. It was pretty deep. They really had to work to get to that shot. So, like, even if he would have made that one, it was a heck of a lot better possession than some of the defensive possessions. He ends up missing that one. You do a great job getting the rebound. Overall, that's a win for Kentucky. And that's really what it's all about. It's just kind of trying to steal some possessions and get some stops as you string them together.
And I think the timing of when Pope brought out the zone was really important as well. Um, because like you see here, we're 12 minutes left in the first half here. Alabama pretty much spends the first 10-ish seconds, maybe 15 seconds of this shot clock, passing the ball around, being like, okay, shoot, Kentucky's in a zone. We need to figure out a way to get ourselves going. Like, look at where, like, all pretty much for most of this possession, Kentucky's keeping the ball well beyond the 3-point line there. Yeah, already under 10 seconds and they're still moving the ball around. And that was the case for most of these zone possessions where it did just enough to kind of confuse Alabama and make them think a little bit harder on how they need to go about getting their shots. This play right here was I think this is just what happens when you play zone sometimes is you're going to be in a bad position to offensive rebound. I mean, look where this shot goes up. You've got three guys above the 3-point line. Ainsley Almanor is watching his guy. Maybe should be watching the ball a little bit better. Brandon Garrison does go and tag his guy here. There's just no one else around him to really try and help an offensive rebound here. Kobe does a decent job, but the ball just kind of lands in a bad spot here. It dies there on the back of the rim, falls right to where it can go to the guy that Garrison was trying to box out there, and he gets an easy slam. So I think if you're trying to make Mark Sears shoot 28, 29 footers, that's not terrible defense. That's probably, I mean, especially if you can get him to take that maybe early in the shot clock too, when they could probably get a better look as things go along. Um, that's probably not a bad shot, but the byproduct of playing zone is you kind of can put yourself in bad position for rebounding here. That's what we saw happen, and Alabama gets an easy dunk out of it.
Yeah, I think the win here is that Alabama never really entered the scoring area, and you were saying it, Zach. Those first couple passes that were essentially just going back and forth between Sears and Holloway, pretty much in these positions, that took 12 seconds off the shot clock. Alabama really never ran any offense. So again, do I love the idea of Mark Sears shooting a wide open three from any distance? I don't love it, but the fact that they ran no offense, took over 10 seconds and then, sure, I would rather him shoot from 32 feet than 22 feet. So I'll live with that. And then, honestly, like, this is pretty good rebounding here. Like, look at this position. Kobe Brea is boxing out his man. Ansley Omanar is going to crack down on his man. Brandon Garrison is getting physical with Clifford Amori here and kind of has him underneath the basket. So, like,
If
in
that
this
ball goes
position,
anywhere else, he can probably get
exactly.
it.
Yeah, you have three white uniforms. in the right position against the red uniforms, and then you have your hawk here in Lamont Butler to get any sort of tip out or kind of chase the ball. It just happens that Mark Sears actually misses this one so badly that it just kind of dies in the pit of the rim, and Amori is just able to get there, and then he has the go-go gadget arms to be able to
Hmm.
throw it down. So that's just unfortunate. There's not a whole lot you can do. It's hard to be like, oh well, I mean that's the issue with rebounding out of a zone. Like that's just kind of bad luck. That happens sometimes.
Hmm. And I believe these were on back-to-back defensive possessions
They
for
were,
UK
yep.
too. Um,
So yeah,
so you
they
could say
went zone
one.
back to back possessions there.
Yeah. So you could say one win, one loss for the
Yep.
zone defense on that one. So we'll go into zone defense play number three here. I'm going to let it play out just so I can refresh my own memory as well.
As you're doing that, Zach, is it's just a foul here. Like the thing to think about with what you just said of the one win, one loss for those two possessions, it's actually a much bigger deal than that. Alabama scored 1.31 points per possession on Saturday. Well, we just watched it. That's 1 point per possession right there
Mm.
because they scored 2 points in two possessions. If you hold Alabama to really anywhere close to 1 point per possession, you're going to win the game. And especially with the way Kentucky scored it, you're like Kentucky would have won this game by 15 points if they held Alabama to 1 point per possession. But they got a lot more than that. So yeah, if you're trading 2 points for every two zone possessions, huge win. But yeah, this third zone clip here, I mean, it's really just again fouling, kind of a bad closeout. Honestly, just showing this one because it was one of the five zone
Well, and
possessions. But go ahead.
go ahead. No, you go.
I was just going to say that when I highlighted that Lamont Butler, Ansley Olminar rotation in that first clip, that's what I wanted. I'm recalling to that here because Jackson Robinson needs to get over here to take Grant Nelson because Olminar's already worried about bumping back to his man. Jackson's just a little slow, or a lot slow, honestly, on this rotation, kind of parts the Red Sea as
Hmm.
we give him a lane to run. Then you have to converge, you end up fouling him.
Well, I think this is part of the reason why we don't see as much zone as maybe some might want is Grant Nelson is a pretty smart player. He's played a lot of basketball. He understood that a lot of, I think, in my opinion, a lot of beating a zone defense is no hesitation. You got to be fast. You got to be quick, whether it's passing, shooting, whatever. Grant Nelson saw this lane, and the second it opened up, he said, I'm going. I'm not hesitating. I'm not going to think about pump faking a pass. I'm going right in. And that's where your defense collapses. And that's when everyone has to kind of scatter around and start, kind of picking up where they, got left in the dust, essentially. So, just really kind of a smart play from Grant Nelson to recognize that, okay, Kentucky's in a zone here. I know if I catch the ball at this spot, there's probably going to be an opening. If that opening is there, I'm taking it the second I see it. And he did, and to his credit, he got a foul call there. So,
Yep. Just a bad rotation there, which that's one you can talk about on film.
and I did thought it was interesting, Brandon, that Jackson Robinson was at the very top of that last zone possession, whereas Lamont is kind of at the top of all these other ones. I don't know if that was just kind of how they switched or whatnot, but that was
Yeah,
something I noticed there as
they
well.
got switched in positioning just by an early high ball screen, so Jack stepped up and Lamont just kind of filled back behind. Um,
Gotcha.
yeah, but yeah,
So here we have
here's the
another
next one.
another zone instance here. So this is our fourth zone play. Another one where you get really just a long shot from a good shooter. Um, we've kind of had a long discussion in our group chat of, is that a good shot? Is it a bad shot? It really just depends. Like, because Mark Sears is kind of having a down season 3-point shooting wise. I think he's
Mhm.
in like the mid, I think 36 or something like that, where he was like in the 40s last season. But we've seen him make these shots time in and time out. He hit at least one NBA three in this game. That's probably a 27 footer right there that he's shooting. Not really anyone near him. But again, it's a shot that Mark Sears can get probably at any point in the shot clock. So maybe making him take it early is you can chalk up as a win.
Yeah,
I'm sure you could counter that argument too and say that you don't want to give a good shooter that kind of a shot, but he missed both of the clean looks that Kentucky gave him. So I'd say you chalk that up as a win here, and Kentucky gets the defensive rebound to close out this possession as well. So Brandon, what did you see from this play here?
yeah, I think it goes back to what we talked about with the last one. Obviously, they offensive rebounded that last one, but yeah, Am I in love with wide open Mark Sears 28 footers? No. But I am kind of in love with Alabama not running any offense. And if you can get them to, I would much rather Mark Sears shoot one from here than one from here, or
Yeah.
one where we go underneath the flare, or one where we go underneath the ball screen, which, both of those things happened when we were playing man to man,
Hmm.
where we gave up threes those ways. So I would much rather him shoot this one than those other ones that I'm talking about. And yeah, I don't love that it's wide open. Part of that comes from playing in the zone, but one of them, the offensive rebounded, got 2 points. The other one, we defensive rebounded. So again, that is a win. If we had two possessions that ended in Mark Sears threes, they got 2 points out of them. I'll take that as a win every day and twice on Sunday.
I think Pope here is just kind of playing the numbers too. Like he's,
Yep.
let's see, Sears on the season, he's shooting 35% from three. He went 4 for 12 in this game, 33%. You held him to below his season average. I think that this is probably these Sears 3 pointers. They're probably shots that Pope would have welcomed two more times the rest of the game. Even though I'd say if Sears got three more or two more looks at that shot, he probably hits one of them. But if he goes 1 for 4 on those
Right.
shots again, that's something you take. So I do feel like that was probably baked into the game plan. There was, hey, if Sears is open from deep, deep, it's not the end of the world if he shoots that. So just solid defense here. Kind of calling back to our very first play, but Brandon, is this the fifth one lined up right here?
Yep. Fifth and final.
Gotcha. So we'll go ahead and let this one play out as well. Brandon, you can go ahead and take us through here, walk us through this play,
Yeah.
whatever you see.
Yep. So this one, they do end up scoring off of, but really this is pretty good defense through the beginning here. The rotations are sound. You see some urgency from these guys. Like, these are good active closeouts, good active hands. Kobe Brea even keeps the ball in front of him over here,
First time
which
all
is good.
season.
Yeah, which is good to see. And now it's just kind of the ball moving. Now, the thing that makes me mad, Mark Sears travels right here 2 steps before he
Oh
dribbles it.
yeah, yeah,
But that's a really good player getting penetration, partially because he travels, but that is what it is. And because you have to collapse, Kobe Bray comes down here to make sure they don't just get a layup with Grant Nelson. You have guys kind of converging on the ball to try to stop Mark Sears. LeBaron Philon wide open over here in the corner. I Maybe at this point he'd already made one. I can't remember, but still at the end of the day, this is a 27% 3-point shooter. I think he's better than that. He's a freshman. He'll keep shooting better. But still,
yeah.
at some point, you have to play the percentages. That's part of being in zone. Again, 3.5 seconds on the shot clock. If you make Alabama run some offense for 27 seconds, that's kind of a win defensively, almost no matter what ends up happening here. He knocks this one in. It stinks. That took him from up 3 to up 6 really late in the half. That's a tough one to give up, but
Hmm.
I really will live with that, because now you think back to the 5 zone possessions that you saw. Alabama scored 5 points on them. It's what we just talked about. 1 point per possession. You would have won the game going away on Saturday. And we can talk more either at the end of this show or in another episode about should we play more zone and my thoughts on that. But on Saturday, it was 1 point per possession in the zone and a heck of a lot more than that away from the zone. So you can draw your own conclusions to some extent on that. But yeah, I thought the zone was honestly pretty good against Alabama. Now, I think there are some reasons why it's hard to play it more against Alabama. But overall, it did have some success when you were able to get to it here through the first half for Kentucky.
Well, go ahead, give me your spiel. What are your overall thoughts on the zone? Because like we've kind of talked about, Alabama is not the 3 point shooting team that they have been. 3 point shooting is one of the easier ways to break down a zone. Do you kind of maybe test your luck a little bit and see if you
Mhm.
can force them up to take a few 28 footers or was this just kind of a one-off situation where Kentucky got lucky on a couple of misses? Where's your head at on the zone? Because we know what Steven thinks.
So, everybody in the world at all times knows what Steven thinks, and that's what we like about him. But I think there's 3 reasons why it's hard to play more zone against Alabama. One of them being they play so stinking fast. Even off of makes, the ball gets down the floor and into the scoring area, past half court, all that. It happens in a hurry whether it's Mark Sears, Aiden Holloway, Phylon, any of those guys. So it's really hard to get back and set up your zone unless it's off of a dead ball. And if you looked back at the beginning, a lot of these clips that we didn't show, I think a couple of them are after Kentucky shot free throws. I think the very first possession was after a timeout. So you're seeing Kentucky get to zone on dead balls after free throws, whatever it may be, where they can kind of get back and get set. That's why it was hard. Even when it was working, it was hard to play it for 3, 4, 5 possessions in a row because especially if you're not scoring, but even if you do go score, it's just hard to go back and get your defense set. So I think that's issue number one. Issue number two is one of Kentucky's strengths to this point in the season has been taking away the three. I mean, opponents shoot 28.6% from 3-point range against Kentucky. That's a top 10 number in college basketball. And part of playing Alabama is kind of forcing the right guys to make threes or take threes. That's a little bit harder to do if you're not matched up. So when you're in zone, you just have less control over who's shooting the threes. So I think that's another reason why you're maybe a little bit hesitant to do it against Alabama. And then I think the third thing is, and this is something that I just don't think people think about, and maybe they like to think that they would be able to mentally overcome it, but I think that's really easy to say and hard to do, is this game was a dogfight for 40 minutes. Kentucky was right there. Sometimes they were winning, sometimes they were losing, sometimes it was tied. It was always really darn close. It's human
Fast.
nature. It's human nature when things are tight, or especially if they're not going well, but even when they're just, it's contentious, it's hard, you're going to go with what you know best. And what you know best, even like forget whether you think you're good at it or not. Kentucky knows man-to-man defense the best. So it can be really hard as a coach to be like, all right, we're down 4 with 8 minutes to go. You know what I want to do right now is play zone, which we only practice 8% of the time, that we only play per synergy. I'm not going to be able to pull it up quick enough. Actually, I am, because I am awesome. It's right here. They play 1.5% of the time. So,
Yikes.
like, you know, just think about any other walk of life. If you were having a hard time at your job using PowerPoint and your boss is breathing down your neck, you're not all of a sudden gonna be like, well, I know I don't really use Google Sheets very often, but I'm going to give that a wing. Like, that's not what you're going to do. You're just going to keep doing with what, going with what you do know best. And I think that's something that the average fan doesn't think about very much. And it's not their job to think about it, but that's why we try to host shows like Zoom Action, is to give you a little bit of an insight into
Well,
the, the
as
mindset
that
of a coach.
as that
Oh, we
average
got Steven.
yeah, just gonna hop in here real quick. As that average
Sweet.
fan, I want to know, like, are guys taught the two zone at an early age? Is this something that for some of them, is this the first time they could have ever played it when they get to college?
I think it's very possible that it's their first time ever being taught it. Like, there's times where in AAU or in some fall league or an all-star game, like, you might just play some zone because it's easy, and generally speaking, people kind of know the bones of the concept. Like, okay, I'm just going to guard this little area over here. But yeah, like, when you're young, there's a stigma about playing zone because, like, you want to try to teach people man to man, because it's kind of just like the accepted American defense almost. Like, it's a cop out to play zone. Like, that there's a lot of like youth leagues that would honestly probably tell you you're not allowed to play zone because they want to teach man to man principles. That's just sort of like a thing that we go through. So when you're young, it's like taboo to teach zone. So then you end up playing man, and then it's an intricate system. It's like, there's a lot of moving parts to it. So it's harder to teach. Therefore, it takes more time to teach, and you only have limited practice time. So as you're trying to perfect your offense and you're trying to get better at ball screen defense because everybody's yelling about how bad you are in ball screen coverage, and you're trying to work on rebounding because everybody's yelling at you about that. You're trying to shoot free throws because people are mad that you don't shoot 75%. Like, we're trying to do all these different things. It's like, okay, so now I spent a 6-minute segment of today's practice on zone. It's just hard to get very good at it if that's all you're doing. And it can be easy to say, like, well, all right, practice it more. Okay, that's fine. Now the age old question is, what do you want me to practice less? Because I only have so much time in the day here. I can't. We're not going to practice for 5 hours so that we can play enough zone. So it just becomes hard to put in the necessary time. Like if you're not going to be a zone team, then you kind of just have to use zone as a changeup. You're throwing it in there to try to throw the other team off their course a little bit, to try to break up the rhythm a little bit. And you saw Kentucky do that honestly pretty darn well against Alabama. It won them the game in Seattle against Gonzaga. So that
Hmm.
they've used it well. But I also think, and I'm not arguing for this because I don't know if I even believe it, but just because it is working in 5 possessions doesn't necessarily mean that you should have played it 15 possessions. It
Hmm.
certainly makes you think that maybe we should study that and we should kind of figure out if we think that or not. But I do think it's important to note, like, just because it worked in Seattle to some extent, just because it worked for 5 possessions, that doesn't mean like, well, gosh, Brandon, you just told me they only scored 1 point per possession against zone. So if we would have played it for 78 possessions, they would have only scored 78 points. Like, well, that's not the way basketball works. But
Yes.
it's been effective. I would be open to seeing it more. But is it the magic elixir? Probably not.
I think it's what you mentioned there. It's like the randomness of it,
Mhm.
the how other teams can get caught off guard, like how sporadic it can be. I think that's what makes it so effective, and that you can break it out for 2 possessions, and then you can float right back into your man to man like nothing ever happened, and you can kind of use it as a junk defense to really mix things up. Like, if you're getting really beat up in man to man, maybe throw in a zone or two to just kind of throw the other team off and maybe give yourself a chance to build some momentum. Like, I feel pretty confident that if Kentucky played zone for an entire game, they would lose every single game.
Mhm.
Because I just don't think, unless it's something that they are only practicing,
Right.
they're just practicing that all day long in practice, no man-to-man defense, which we only saw one coach do that. He did it for 45 years and won one title. So I don't know if it's exactly something that you want to like really buy into, like with what Boeheim did. So, but I like you. I'm with Brandon. I would like to see it more. Like if you got
Mhm.
5 possessions and you're giving up 1 point per possession, let's see what happens with 10 possessions.
Yeah.
And maybe just kind of uptake it from there and find Pope and his staff are looking at the numbers. They're going to look for that perfect little middle ground of where they can use the zone without it being too predictable and things like that. So I like what we saw from it against Alabama. I think it'd be awesome to use it a few more times throughout the games moving forward, because I do think it can be effective against these kind of teams, but it doesn't stop some of the issues, which are foul trouble,
Mhm.
rebounding. It really doesn't slow down those issues. But um, Brandon, we've been talking about that long enough. Let's kind of float into our last little bit here, and we don't even really need the play for this. Because I just want to talk about ball screen defense. And this is just like I said, this is not a perfect example of of the point I'm trying to make. It's just kind of me questioning, like, okay, so this play here, you're about to have Sears run back around this screen. Well, yeah, Brandon's restarting it for me. Perfect. So Sears is going to try and wiggle his way around these screens. Um, he calls for it again. He wants to rescreen. So yeah, just pause it where Sears is right at the 3 point line. So right here. So here's my question about the ball screen defense is you've got Lamont behind Mark Sears. He's got his roll man. Sears has his roll man right to his right, who's going to have a head of steam. He's going to be ahead of Butler. You've essentially got a situation where Sears and I forget the Alabama guy's name, but
Clifford
you've pretty much
Amori.
Amore. That's Amore. That was Jack's joke during the game, so I stole that one from him. But you've essentially got a 2-on-1 here against Brandon Garrison,
Yeah.
and a lot of times, like I think Brandon Garrison ends up playing this one really well, but he stays back. He doesn't really press up. He stays at that 3 point line. I think Lamont and Brandon do a good job here of actually taking that lob threat away and doing a good job
Mhm.
recovery. But my question overall, Brandon, is why not just have Brandon Garrison push up there even more and just try and get the ball out of Mark Sears' hands immediately? And why isn't more blitzing ball screen defense something that Kentucky tries to employ a little bit? Because clearly the ball screen defense, even in this game, just overall was not great. You're letting guys get into positions where they're getting downhill steam, things like that. We had our whole conversation off camera before this about, my thoughts and your thoughts on it, but we'll kind of rehash a little bit of what we were saying, but just kind of give me your general idea on why Kentucky has not been doing any sort of hedging, blitzing, trapping on the ball screens this season.
Yeah, I think that it's certainly something that I've talked about as well, going back to earlier in the season, because there was a couple of times, I think it was maybe even the Gonzaga game, where you did see, especially Brandon Garrison, hard hedge a couple, blitz, as you're saying. Um, and it was effective. Like, he looked really comfortable doing it, and I think he has those skills. But similar to what I was talking about with playing more zone, there's always a give and a take, and I think there's two or three reasons why you maybe don't as well. And again, I'm not making the argument against it. I am kind of just making the mental argument of, like, this would be the give and the take in the coaches' offices. One, if you blitz and you're out here being more aggressive, there's more of a chance of Brandon Garrison picking up fouls. And same for Amari Williams. Both of those guys are relatively foul prone as is. Would we not rather save their fouls for stuff around the rim and or on the glass, as opposed to them picking up fouls 30 feet from the basket? That's argument number one. Argument number two, all right, we get out here and blitz the ball screens. As I said earlier, we're already yelling at these guys to try to get them to rebound more. Well, it's going to be a little bit harder for them to rebound the basketball if they have to recover from 25, 30 feet from the basket. And then also, and this is something I've talked about on Twitter a little bit the last couple of days, and I think on KS Board as well, is that you have to be careful to some extent. And I don't want to make too big of a deal about this, but there is even a defensive to offensive trade-off, because let's face it, it takes a lot more um, effort to get out and blitz ball screens as opposed to play drop coverage. So now,
Hmm.
for already having a shorter rotation with some guys out and Andrew Carr's back, and you're also battling some foul trouble, whatever it may be, does your offense slip if you're asking even more of Amari Williams and Brandon Garrison on the defensive end? Because we know the way that Kentucky plays offense, it's through their five men. So you're already asking Amari Williams and Brandon Garrison to kind of run the ship from the five offensively. And now you're asking them to do this, really high pressure, high skill ball screen defensive coverage. Is that just too much for them? And I
Hmm.
don't mean that as like a shot at them. I just mean for anybody. Is that asking too much of a college basketball player to be able to get out, especially for a team like Alabama with dynamic guards? Like, okay, we expect you to blitz 30 ball screens today, and we also expect you to run the offense like the quarterback. Like, I'm not sure if you can do both of those things at a super high level. And we know we want them to do the offensive stuff at a high level, because that's what makes that's Kentucky's bread and butter. And but do you start to pull away from that? And then, like I said to you before, like, maybe the best balance is second best offense, 78th best defense. I'm not saying we should all just accept that today on January 22nd, or as you're watching this on January 23rd or whatever, but just because you become the 60th best defense doesn't mean that maybe you didn't pull down the offense to 10th now, and maybe that's
Hmm.
not as good of a trade off. So those are some of the reasonings. I'm with you, Zach. I would like to see it, especially because just like with the zone, I mean, what we're doing isn't great defensively, so I have no issue trying some different things, but there is always kind of a counterpoint to every point that you make. And like you and I have said
Yeah.
before, the the thing that I think we should all, lay our heads down at night and feel comfortable knowing is that any conversation that you and I are having on Zoom action, or any conversation we have on Twitter or on KS board, or with your buddies at the bar, Mark Pope and the coaching staff had them long before we could even conceptualize them. And
Hmm.
and that is, I think that's a little bit of that's a blessing that we have this year with this staff.
Yeah, I feel like every time I try and make an argument for wanting to blitz more, or hedge, or whatever term you want to use, I can almost make a pretty easy counterpoint after that. Like, I feel like the main point of trying to blitz these ball screens is to make it tough for, because the SEC just has a lot of really good guards. Ideally, you'd like to try and get the ball out of the best player's hands. That's an easy way to do it. You can trap them, just put pressure on them, make it so they have to give it up a little bit sooner. But then again, Mark Sears shot 6 for 17, and I know he had 24 points, but he shot 6 for 17 and 4 for 12 from deep. The reason he had his 24 points was getting to the line. How he got to the line, we can talk. That's a whole different thing. I don't remember if he got a lot of those at the end or not. But and then on the kind of that same point, Kentucky's the best 3-point shooting defense team in the country. So you're already getting to a point where you're making players that you want to shoot the
Right.
ball. So in a sense, it's the man to man is already kind of working to that desired result. Um, I think what I like about maybe seeing it more is I think Kentucky just has the length to pull it off. Like you've got guys like Brandon Garrison and Amari Williams are long and quick enough. Maybe Brandon more so than Amari are quick enough at being able to do the recover. Like they can get out there and recover and keep their hands up. Well, maybe Amari can. He's not been very good at keeping his hands in the air this season for whatever reason. That might be that's a whole different thing. But so I think they have the personnel to do it. I even think Almanor is really good at just playing into space on defense, and he's long too. Um, so I like the idea, like from that perspective of just maybe because especially because Kentucky is also the worst team in the country at turning teams over other than Lamont Butler and Otega Owe. So maybe an easy way to get an extra, couple turnovers per game is to really put some pressure on those guys, get yourself some easy fast break opportunities. But as you mentioned, Brandon Garrison, it's going to be hard to ask that guy to run all over the floor 15 times a game when he also has to operate the offense on the other end of the floor. And the same
Yeah.
goes for Amari Williams when he's on the floor, having to ask him to do all that. That is just that's very taxing, especially for the way that Kentucky plays. So, and like we said, like you said, there's Popes and his staff has thought about this. There's there's definitely a very, very good reason why they don't do more of the blitzing and hedging. And there's obviously a reason. I'm sure a lot of it is some of the points that we've made. There's probably other stuff in there too that Pope's seen from the numbers and what he's seen on film. But there's clearly a reason that they don't do it more. They think it's working just enough. And I think I don't remember if I made this off camera or I think it was off camera. The point I made that Kentucky has 4 losses this season. They only lost one game because of bad defense, and that was the Alabama game. The other 3 losses were really just a result of playing poor offense and not scoring enough. I'm sure some of that it kind of plays off of each other. Bad
Yeah.
defense can turn into bad offense, things like that. But Kentucky could really only have 1 or 2 losses this season if the offense just played the way it has played in that Alabama game. So we might just be nitpicking a little bit too much. And like you said, it's going to make defensive rebounding a little bit harder if you're pulling your 7-footer out, 25 feet from the basket, especially if they can get a clean look at a three off that first pass. But like with the zone, it's something that I'd like to see a little bit more. Just maybe throw it in there to see how teams handle it, especially if you've got like I don't know how many more Mark Sears types they're going to go up against the rest of this season. I know we play Alabama again uh, later in the. I guess that's a road game, so it'll be
Yep.
interesting to see if they maybe do more blitzing on that. I mean, like I said, they did a decent job on Mark Sears. He still had 24 points and 9 assists, so it kind of sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud to myself. But you made him take shots that were tough, and he missed them more often than not. So I think in that regard, it was a win from how you were from how Kentucky was defending him. But yeah, so we'd just like to see a little bit more of it and a little bit more zone. And I think that's just kind of us being selfish because we don't actually see it behind the scenes. So we're
Right.
like, "Oh, I want to actually see what it looks like in person in a real live game." But again, there might be a very good reason for that. So that was my spiel on that, Brandon. You got anything else here before we kind of wrap things up?
The last thing I want to say quickly before we get out of here, and you use the word nitpicking, and I think that's an important point for you and I to keep in mind, and for all the Big Blue Nation, that
Hmm.
I think we're lucky to be having these conversations right now because I don't think that on November 15th or November whatever whenever the season started, that we weren't anticipating looking at this season through a championship lens. We,
Hmm.
we we were kind of looking at it as, "Well, let's see how things go. Let's win an NCAA tournament game. Let's be a top 25 team." And now, because you beat Duke, you beat Gonzaga, you beat Mississippi State, you beat Texas A&M, you beat Florida, you go toe to toe with Alabama. Now you're critiquing the team differently than you would have if this was if we were 11-6 right now. our conversations would be very different. But
Yeah.
now we're holding them to a championship level, and that's great. I'm happy that we're in that position, but those are the type of nitpicks that we're having. Like the defense isn't awful. It's maybe a problem if you want to win the championship, but the defense isn't awful, especially when you consider how awesome the offense is. So
Hmm.
you kind of have to take a step back and kind of remember, like, okay, I'm looking at all of this through a lens of trying to win a championship. And a couple of months ago, I don't think that any of us really expected for that to be like a realistic conversation that we're having. And that's a credit to Coach Pope, the staff, the players, everybody involved for getting us to a point where in late January, we're having such high level conversations.
Yeah, I was definitely expecting at this point in the season, back when we were in the preseason, I was expecting to being like having to try and defend the fact that like Kentucky just wasn't any good. That's kind of where I was having that was where my thought was back then. So yeah, where we're at right now is definitely a completely different the expectations have just changed. They just have. So um but that's good. It's good for us, good for the show,
Yep.
good for all of the fans and everybody. So we love it. But this was another long episode. We're going to go ahead and get out of here. Kentucky plays again. They've had their week off. They play again on Saturday on the road. I think it's a 2:30 Eastern tip-off against Vanderbilt, a pretty solid team. They just had a huge win against Tennessee the other day at home. So be a fun game there. But we will see you all when we see you all. Adios.
See you.